For the clergy, or what's our?
There are some.
Just
So it's a combination of several factors. So it's a combination of several things. One is going to be there are certain canons, the laws about how we do weddings, and there's certain rules in the canons that have to do with things like. Think of an example. One of the canons in the church, for example, is that if someone is getting remarried after they've previously been married, they have to have the consent of the bishop. So that's a canon in the church, so we have to do that. Versus some rules that are in our prayer book, saying, for example, in the prayer book it says at least one of the two people being married should be baptized. They don't both have to be baptized. They don't have to be Episcopalians, but at least one of them should be a Christian if we're going to do a Christian sacrament of holy matrimony. I mean, you can marry two non-Christians, but for the blessed sacrament of holy matrimony, at least one of them should be a Christian. And then there's local customs, which aren't in the prayer book and aren't in the canons, but will have certain local customs, like, I'm trying to think of like a local St. James custom.
Hot dogs with no ketchup?
I mean, we'll say things like a lot of churches, maybe a local custom will be we don't allow flash photography or something like that. It's not in the prayer book, it's not a church canon, but it may be a local rule not to have flash photography because it's just disruptive of the service. So all of
customs around the music, like
the customs
we
around the
won't do
music.
secular music generally.
Again, that's a custom. It's not in the prayer book or in canon. That's a good point. Like a lot of the music we do at St. James should all be sacred music of some kind. So no Lady Gaga.
No, that middle of the road.
Right. So and some very some famous pieces that you commonly hear at secular weddings that we generally will not do because they're not sacred music. And so when they negotiate all that with Stephen, one of our local customs is everything has to be signed off on by Stephen Buzard first. Even if he's not doing the wedding, he still signs off on the music. It's a local custom. So everything we do and don't do. It does. Yes, it does really well because that's what we're doing. So I had several people come to me and say, I know you said we're finished with vows and creeds and we're moving on from there. But several people came to me and said, but we didn't talk about marriage vows and ordination vows, like two really important sets of vows. And so I said, fine, by popular demand, we'll do one more session where we'll talk about marriage vows and ordination vows. I brought an expert who knows the marriage vows and ordination vows pretty well.
That's what happens when you're married to a priest, right?
Yep.
When you are married to somebody who is getting ordained a priest, you get very familiar with marriage vows and ordination vows. In case anyone doesn't know, this is a member of St. James, member of the choir, and also my wife, Katie Balke. So we both have personal experiences working through these sets of vows together. So we're going to start us off with a classic example of marriage vows.
Marriage is what brings us together today. Marriage, that blessed arrangement, that dream within a dream. Then love, true love, will follow you forever. So treasure your one.
Skip to the end.
Have you the wit?
Here comes my Wesley now.
I do wonder how many times in a service I feel like the groom is looking at me and saying, skip to the end. They've never done it yet, but they may be thinking, that's not all that different than what we do. It's rooted in this deep tradition of Anglicanism.
We got the best ones.
How long are like Episcopal weddings typically?
Good question. It really depends. They're very modular in our prayer book, so you can expand and contract depending on how many elements we want to put in. No music, no communion, just wedding vows and out. I mean, you could do it in 20 minutes, which maybe sounds great for some folks. I personally always take the approach of feeling like if we're putting all the work into making this happen, I feel like 20 minutes feels like it's not very much payoff for what was a lot of work that went into making this day happen. So I always encourage, let's beef it up a little bit. We'll put some music in, and if you have the whole deal, music, communion, sermon, long sermon. I mean, it could be an hour and a half, pretty easily. All the scripture, every scripture option, because it's optional how many you do. So really, you could range half an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how many pieces you plug into it.
Yesterday's wedding was a solid hour and a half.
Yeah, we did all the things. So, before I continue with anything,
I'll jump in.
the whole idea of what we're trying to do here is take the opportunity to say the words that we say in here should reflect then how inform the lives that we live out there. So when it comes to the idea of saying the marriage vows or a little bit the ordination vows, we don't often stop in the middle of a wedding to say, now everybody think about what you're saying and what this means, but here at the Forum we do have the opportunity to say, let's stop and think about some of these things we're vowing. So I included some vows and just some of the questions. So this comes from our prayer book or the expanded liturgy for weddings in the Episcopal Church. Dearly beloved, we have come together in the presence of God to witness and bless the joining together of this person and this person in holy matrimony. The joining of two people in a life of mutual fidelity signifies to us the mystery of the union between Christ and his church, and so it is worthy of being honored among all people. We'll just pause there for a second. Feel like you've heard these words, pretty familiar. You've heard them at a lot of weddings. Well, what are we saying in this? Let's try.
It's important that it's seen, witnessed by the congregation.
Yeah.
It's not a group of people.
Right? Very much like baptism, where we do it very much in presence of the community.
And just like with baptism, the community makes vows too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you who witness these vows do. I'm not going to get the exact words, but
We'll say
support
that,
these people in their marriage, and we emphatically answer, we will. Just like in a baptism. We don't do it alone.
And we're marking here that it's not just marriage. You can go anywhere and get married. You can go to the courthouse, you can go to a beach, have a justice of the peace or an attorney marry you. You can have somebody that gets licensed to do it online do it. What we're saying here is that a little bit something else is happening in addition to just marriage. There's something sacramental happening here. That idea of holy matrimony. Where we're basically saying we're not just married, they're not just getting married, we're coming together in this place for God to be present and witness and bless this.
Yeah, I mean, we could just, go to the courthouse, sign a piece of paper and say, now we're married, but the sacrament, we understand sacraments to be the outward and visible sign of what God is doing or has done. So the couple is married, I mean, that's a decision. They're married when they decide they are married, but we stand up and make it a sacrament when we stand up and recognize it publicly.
The presider then goes on. The union of two people in heart, body, and mind is intended by God for their mutual joy. So we're going to list why we're doing this, right? For their mutual joy, for the help and comfort they give to one another in prosperity and adversity, and when it is God's will, for the gift of children and their nurture in the knowledge and love of the Lord. Therefore, marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. Thoughts, things,
Yes, this may not be specifically relevant to this, but I was comparing it in my mind to baptismal vows.
Yeah.
And one of the differences feels like, I really like that language of sacrament. This is, we are honoring something in an outward show that's already happening. It seems like the union is, in some ways, the marriage is, we're watching something that's already happened. Like, these two people have been brought together, there's something spiritual going on here that we want to celebrate. Whereas the baptism is kind of the thing itself, like you are performing that union in that moment. And so I was just wrestling with that language. There is a kind of, you are now committed to each other, but in some ways that's been going on prior to this moment.
Yeah, the
Otherwise,
decision
that
was already
moment,
made.
the decision was
Yeah.
made. Yeah.
Well, especially, you know, when we baptize like infants who aren't really aware, who can't consent, like, but we're doing it on their behalf.
Can't do with marriage, by the way.
Yeah.
They have to consent.
It's mutual, like, yeah.
But I think that there is an element in baptism too, though, which is what we say in your baptism, you're being marked as a child of God, as Christ's own and beloved by God. Well,
Acknowledged by the community.
yeah, I would argue that any human being, even before they're being baptized, is already a beloved child of God. Is already beloved by. I don't think, like, God didn't love this person, now we baptize them, now they're loved. I would say in baptism we are sacramentalizing that thing that we think was, right? And so that's kind of like the wedding part, in that we're sacramentalizing the joining of people who really effectively were already joined in most ways other than like the outward sign. Yeah.
One thing that I was reading this, I was thinking about, we were married by Justice of the Peace and had a blessing here 3 or 4 years ago. I remember when Lisa was talking about crafting the vows, she was very careful not to give the impression that we were being married again. It wasn't even with a marriage.
It was a blessing.
Right. And we've done those where you're right, the language is slightly shifted a little bit to say we are blessing this union that already has been. Laura, you were about to.
So, just the theology of the last sentence.
Yeah.
That God instituted marriage. I don't necessarily disagree, but I also don't necessarily know where that comes from.
Right.
Marriage itself is instituted by God. That's not in anything that I've read.
And I have the same thought every time it's fun. So let's think about this theologically a little bit, because we were saying that the union of two people, therefore marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly. I get that. We should be taking this seriously. We should be reverent about it, deliberate about it. We should make sure we know what we're doing and have thought through it, and it's in accordance with the purposes by which it was instituted by God, which is interesting because, of course, there were lots of people who were married lots of people who were married who were atheists, right? There's lots of people who were married that don't believe it was instituted of God. There are lots of marriages that happened. There were lots of unions that happened among people that were outside of what we would call this marriage that's instituted by God. So what do we think? It's complicated, but I hear you saying, like, I believe in this idea. I believe theologically in this idea that what brings me into this union with another person is something that God did in our lives to bring us together, to prepare us for each other, to fit together in that way that we need to. I think God has been at work in it, but also I understand that the evolution of the legal idea of marriage kind of went parallel to that, not necessarily theologically.
I think back to Genesis, at creation, when God made the first human and recognized it's not good for this human to be alone, so I'm going to make a partner, and they'll do it together. There's a very traditional, maybe more conservative argument that the purpose of marriage is for procreation, because that is in the text of Genesis, but that's not everybody's. That's not universally true. We use marriage language sometimes when we talk about the relationship between Christ and the church. And also, the mutuality, the commitment to one another, I think also references our relationship to God. You know, God is inherently relational. We are inherently relational. We are made to be in relationship. And so this is kind of representative of that, I think.
Any idea in the early church when marriage took on the more sacramental aspect like it is today? But I can't imagine they had a set of prayers for marriages back in the 3rd century.
Right. Well, and if anybody really wants to take a deep dive into this as well, let me know. I can share the document with you because we have a large document of collected essays that the Episcopal Church gathered and thought over, particularly when we were in 2015 voting to normalize same-sex marriage across the Episcopal Church. And it really takes this deep dive into looking at marriage from the standpoint of when the idea of legal marriage was really about the conveyance of property. In generations, it was about the legal union of families and then how property would get conveyed through the generations. And that there was a time in which if people didn't have property that was going to be conveyed, if they were serfs on the land and didn't own anything, there was no property to convey. They may have had unions with another person, but never actually legally got married because there was no reason to. Now that's wholly separate from this idea of God has this purpose in mind. So we even do a dive into understanding why marriage would have or would not have happened in that case, and how the church over time stepped in and sacramentalized this and said, no, in holy matrimony, something is happening when we say this isn't just about legal status. This is about God at work in the lives of these people, and joining them together. But there's an interesting evolution on that, and we've been wrestling with it, and we're still wrestling with it to this day.
Also, property, the wife is property.
Right.
Keep that in the world.
Well, right, a lot of it, even going down to the idea of the origin of the wedding bands being I am claiming you, I'm putting this mark on you to show that you are my property. There was a time when it was normal for only the wife to get a wedding ring, right? Because that was.
Why would we do that instead of dogs?
But it's the idea of I claim you now, right? This is and the idea of the father of the bride was literally handing over the daughter to the husband to be sort of this was my property, now it's your property. And in the older marriage rite prayers, it very much still conveys that language. It's the whole, who is giving this woman to be handed over in marriage? And the legal owner was I am giving her in marriage, and conveying property with a hand. There was a handshake, right? Handing them over, handshake. And one of the very first things, interestingly, that got added into the wedding liturgy in English was the consent of the bride. Prior to, because that couldn't be in Latin, where the bride didn't understand she was being conveyed to new ownership. I mean, it was crude to be saying, this is what was happening. They said, we need to do this in English so she understands what's happening here and can consent to it. So I like the idea of the consent part, but it's interesting that it started from a place of, you do know you're being handed over to new management, right? And so she could say, yes, I understand and I agree to this.
For this reason, a woman shall leave her father and mother and be joined. I mean, that's in Genesis too.
And over time, we've shifted that language to now we don't do that anymore. Actually, I've done a lot of weddings where, this is how we did this at our wedding, I think, where I'm making this up because I've done it for other couples, but we've actually asked both families.
All of our parents to stand up with us.
And say
yeah.
how do we say it? I don't remember the exact language that we used in it, but it was about saying who is joining this family and who is joining this family, and it was about mutually joining our families together in this union. There was a sense of a mutuality to it, rather than a conveyance of property element to it, which I really liked.
I'm just curious, I'm guessing that the dowry was more of a social historical convention than anything theologically accurate.
Yeah, again, a lot of it was, again, rooted in the idea of saying there's a cost to this transaction. Like a transaction is happening here, and here's the dowry, or I mean, you even hear it referred to as like the bride price. Sometimes the language was used like, here's the bride price, and depending on who was getting married, the dowries had to be larger or smaller, depending on how expensive of a purchase this is. I mean, that's...
Are you going designer label or off the rack?
Well, and all of the things that go into marriage, when a lot of our rules around marriage and divorce and who's allowed to remarry and who can marry who, and a lot of that had to do with the idea of, there was a time where mostly like rulers and royalty and people who had authority and bloodlines that had to be preserved, marriage was very tightly controlled in those instances because they were talking about who were going to be the heirs to property and rulership and titleship. And so you have things like Henry VIII, for example, whose brother was married to the potential heirs of Spain, and when his brother died, it created a crisis in the land because this union that had happened between England and Spain was now threatened, and so they quickly had to say, oh, you've got to marry the brother now, because it was about making sure that that union was preserved, and that led to the whole problem that ultimately led to Henry VIII separating from Rome over it. But that was, the marriage part was about a contract to have a union between England and Spain, that kind of thing. So serfs that worked in the land didn't have to worry about any of it, so a lot of them didn't get married. Now they had, a lot of them had committed monogamous relationships that would have looked like marriage in every way to us today, but without the legal aspect of it, because they didn't have to worry about going to war with another country if you married the wrong person.
In a sec was, the wording, anyone who opposes this, raise your, speak up.
That's
Was
the
that
way-
ever not in?
Yeah, there. See, then that's the next part, yes.
Yeah. But was that a later thing, or was that a?
Well, this came about. This came about in the movies. It's portrayed incorrectly in the movies. So a lot of what you see in weddings in movies aren't the way they necessarily work in real life. Because I will get up as the presider and I will say, if anyone knows any reason why these two people should not or cannot be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. And you have like the person burst through the door and say, I object because I'm her true love. That's not how it works, right? That's not a legal objection to their union. A legal objection to their union would be something like, she's already married to someone else and legally cannot be married. Now that's an objection that we would have to hear. Or for some reason, the groom is secretly 15 years old and just looks really mature for his age. Like, that would be a standing for which we could say, I object to this, but not just, I don't want them to be married. It's not legal standing for objection. What we would literally do in this case is if somebody were at this moment, because we're performing a legal function here. If I were to marry two people that turns out legally can't be married, it would be trouble, cause trouble. I have to make sure I'm legally doing this, because I'm a functioning agent of the state of Illinois with laws. So excuse me, if anyone were to object and say, I object to this union, what we would do is we'd pause, everyone sit down, we're going to pause for a minute. I will take the petitioner to another room and we will sit down and I will hear the grievance and hear, is there legal standing to this grievance? It's never happened before, but if it were to happen, worst case scenario, I would have to come out and say, everyone, we can't have this wedding, it legally can't happen. Go home. Never had to do that. But if the person that I'm talking to says like, no, I deeply love her, I don't want her to marry this guy, I would say, sorry, we're proceeding. Like, I would come out and we'd say, everybody, we may resume. Again, like I said, I've never had to do it, but that's why we ask, is because this is the last opportunity for a public declaration of someone who knows a reason why it legally cannot happen.
Is that a legally binding part of the?
Which part of it?
When you're asking?
Is it legally required that I ask, or? I mean, I am required to ask by our church. In the liturgy of our church, it's in our prayer book that we do ask this. And I am signing a certificate at some point saying that I have legally married these two people together. So
It's different for different places. I know, like in France, for example, you can have a church wedding, but it's not required. You have to have a legal ceremony,
yeah.
and they're separate.
Same in Mexico.
Yeah, the
A lot of South
church
American-
wedding is not sufficient.
A lot of countries in South America, you legally do the wedding in like a courthouse, and then you go to the church for the blessing over the marriage.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in a civil marriage, they don't qualify this, do they? I mean, if you get a civil marriage, they don't ask this question.
It's interesting. I've never presided at a civil marriage, of course, but I would imagine we should ask Andy this. He's done some. I have an attorney cousin who has done some weddings, and I imagine if he's marrying two people, he has to legally make sure they're not secretly married to someone else. Would be my guess. Otherwise, it's malpractice, right?
In a courthouse wedding, you make the people who, I was married in a courthouse, you make a legal statement on the affidavit that there's, you're not, you have some sort of blood relationship, and then the court person who does it just accepts it.
Gotcha.
They don't- they
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
ask.
Because otherwise, it's like contempt of court or something. It's a
Well, it's a felony.
It's a
To lie under oath.
to lie under oath, right?
We love a good felon.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
In Australia, when they do marriage, they actually have, it's required by law to state several times in this dialogue that marriage is between a man and a woman. And it's by several times. Afterwards, I talked to the person and said, it seemed odd because he said that multi times marriage is, and I said, and marriage equality in other parts of the world, that's not. And they said by law of Australian law, and they said, and if for some reason he omits all 3 or 4 times, and they said you have to do all of them, they'll lose their license to perform marriages. So I mean, and they said, and the government actually has people out just attending marriages to make sure all these references are stated.
Now, are same-sex marriages legal?
No.
You know, so they're not. I was gonna say it's interesting if like they do same-sex marriages, but they just still have to say man and woman. Because legally they have to.
Right. So it's very weird.
So okay.
It's weird. That's why I was asking about it because it's weird.
Yeah. Well, for a while in our prayer book liturgy, it said man and woman all over the place, and like even when we started doing same-sex marriages in the Episcopal Church, we had one liturgy and it still said man and woman, and so we have now since updated that. But there was kind of a weird moment of like, well, we have to use these words. Do we have to use these words, even though these words actually are inaccurate to this occasion? And it's hard to change the prayer book, so it took years for us to do it.
So now does the prayer book say man and woman, or man and man, or woman and woman, or do they say,
These persons.
or do we say stakeholders in life?
Well, like here, for example, it's used to say, into this holy union, this man and woman now come to be joined. Now what we do is we say, into this holy union, and we say their names. This person and this person are come to be joined, and it kind of doesn't matter what their gender is, because legally it doesn't matter what their gender is. It's their names that matter. So that, for example, that's how they changed that there.
This has been the topic of several general conventions now. I mean, the 1979 Book of Common Prayer still uses the man and woman language. There it is. And that's been memorialized by General Convention, which means the 79 prayer book will never be replaced. We will add to it. We've added like enriching our worship and what's the other one? What's the name for the same sex?
Well, it's now just marriage, the blessing of marriage 2.
Okay.
There's blessing of marriage 1 and the blessing of marriage 2 now.
So we had to catch up liturgically with where we were philosophically and socially, which takes acts of General Convention. So starting in 2015 was when we voted that universally across the Episcopal Church we would recognize same-sex unions, and subsequent to that we've voted to approve the language of the liturgy as it's been updated. In fact, in 2024 in Louisville, there was a vote to, because we're an umbrella and not everybody, unfortunately, is on board. And so the more conservative Anglicans were saying, like, we feel left behind, we feel, marginalized, which I have opinions, but but we did, as an act of general convention, there was a resolution to say, like, yes, the 79, this traditional language is still, it can still be what we use. And some bishops and priests still insist on that. It's becoming fewer and fewer as we've navigated, It used to be up to the bishops in each diocese. They could decide for their diocese whether or not they were going to allow same-sex marriages. We've now said that just because of where you live, just because of what diocese you're in, you shouldn't be denied. And so a bishop who personally doesn't recognize same-sex marriage can give oversight to another bishop, and that bishop can bless the marriage of the two people.
It's right. It's the compromise of making marriage equality access available to everyone without restriction, but not compelling someone to say you have to do this wedding whether you want to do it or not. Like, I can't be compelled to do a wedding I don't feel like I can do, but I do have to make that marriage available to anyone who is legally able to be married. So if it might mean we have to find them someone who will do it. If for some reason I felt like I personally would not.
But that's true of heterosexual couples too.
Right.
Stephen can say, no, I don't sign off on this marriage.
But I can't prohibit them from being
Right.
Here's some, so in terms of vows, will you have this person to be your spouse, that language, will you have this person to be your spouse, to live together in the covenant of marriage? Here we're vowing some things, we're making some promises. What are we promising? We're promising to love them, to comfort them, to honor them, keep them in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, and to be faithful to them as long as they both shall live.
No more obey.
Yeah.
Yes, obey is not in there.
Dang.
Don't obey anymore. You do have to obey your bishop when we get to the ordination vows. Will all of you, and then we ask everyone, will all of you here also promise to support these people? They're not doing it alone. And that's very similar to the baptism, right? You are not making these promises alone. You are making these promises with the support of God and all of the people with you.
Is it another part, or where's richer and poorer?
Oh,
it's coming up.
Yes,
Okay.
here we go. And so then this is the vows they make to each other. So prior, these are the promises you're making to God, right? These are the promises they're making to each other. In the name of God, I take you to be my spouse, to have and to hold, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we are parted by death. This is my solemn vow. It's very similar to the other language. It's just what we've pivoted from is we've pivoted from making the promise to God to now making the promise to each other.
Does the church allow couples to write their own vows?
We will, and I have. It's a conversation. I usually want to take some time to understand why. And I've had people give very compelling reasons about I have personal vows that I want to make, and the biggest thing for me is making sure they're actually vowing something. If you've ever seen like TV weddings or a wedding maybe you've gone to in real life where they say a lot,
nice
they're like,
things about
I
the
love
other
you so
person.
much,
Yeah.
I love looking at your eyes, I love the food that you make, I'm looking forward to us being happy together, which is all lovely, but they didn't actually vow anything, right? So that's the big thing is I do want to make sure you actually are promising something. And just also, personally, I have found very few people that have written vows that are an improvement upon these, but I'm always open to hearing them from folks who do want to write their own vows. And I've had some very lovely ones.
Until we are parted by death, I've heard someone say, well, you can be parted by the death of the marriage. That every marriage ends in death, but it's the death of the marriage.
That same document that we came out at, it spends a lot of time wrestling also with the idea of what is a dissolution of a marriage. When we are saying that this is an indelible promise we are making, that sometimes is not indelible. Sometimes they don't stand the test of time and they do end. And what is the idea of, in the 70s in particular, when in the United States we shifted to no-fault divorce, and when we shifted in the 70s to no-fault divorce, that really changed in the church the discussion about marriages that didn't end because of some kind of misconduct from one person or another that invalidated the vows or invalidated the contract per se, but two people who just no longer want to be married. And is that a valid reason to no longer be married? And where we've come to in the church is mixed. I mean, some people really wrestle with it and still say, no, marriage is for life. There's no such thing as divorce. It can't happen. However, I've witnessed it. Divorce happens. Whether you believe it or not, it really does happen. So, and often from two people that have said something as simple as, when we got married 20 years ago, we were different people. We've changed so much. The world has changed. Our circumstances are the same. There is something to be said for two people that are saying, if we were coming together now, we wouldn't get married. We wouldn't have gotten married in 100 years now. That's an important conversation to be having between two people for whom they aren't the people that they were and would not have entered into this arrangement through no malfeasance, no misconduct of their own, other than just humans growing and changing like humans do.
Well, and I think sometimes it's hard because, like, I know Lisa has acknowledged in her sermons, like, feeling conflicted about some of the language in Scripture about how bad divorce is and how sinful it is, and I mean that's hard for somebody who's been divorced. I heard a clergy person talk about it once, saying, yeah, we can call it a sin. It's grievous to God when the relationship ends, but sin is sin, and we're all sinners, and we all sin in different ways, and this is no worse than other kinds of sin.
And all can be forgiven.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, insofar as it's my right to be able to weigh in as a priest on the conversation to say, I would say probably it is grievous and sad to God to have a union between two people who have made promises and vows to each other for that to have ended. It is sad, but I think there's also the case to be made for sometimes it would be worse to be together in some circumstances, where the union is actually more harmful than the dissolution of the union. And in that case,
or if it becomes
how are we
dishonest
making,
in some way.
Right, like how are we making God happy by having two people who are miserable in their union forced to be able to continue just because we say so? I don't, and this is my personal opinion, I'm weighing in personally on this just to say, I can't see God being happy with that, with wanting it that way. Not from what I know of a loving God who I think wants us to be our truest selves and live in love with one another and with God. So if a union really does get to the point where two people would be more fully themselves, more the people that God would want them to be apart than together, forcing them to continue to be together doesn't seem like what God would want. I feel like that's kind of where I'm weighing in on it. I mean, other people have other opinions.
When the bishop allows for a second marriage, does he or she annul that first marriage, or is that something of the past?
Interestingly, it depended, particularly around the no-fault divorce idea in the 70s. There was a time where people thought two different things might be happening. Some people were making the argument that this divorce is an acknowledgement that the true marriage never really happened, which sounds a lot like annulment to me, right? It's the idea of saying, I recognize this divorce because I recognize that marriage was never valid. And then there were some people who were saying it was a valid marriage, but it has come to an end. Now, legally, there's no distinction there, but in the minds of some bishops in the 70s, they were really wrestling with. There were some bishops that were saying, yes, it has to be about, it was never a marriage to begin with. and other bishops said it was a marriage, but it ended. And now, really, the way the canons of the church works, it really is just a matter of, in order for the bishop to consent, they need to make sure that the actual legal divorce happens so that they can legally be remarried again. So if I have to petition someone who's getting remarried after they have gotten a divorce, I have to see the legal divorce decree to make sure I'm legally I'm following the law, like you were saying, so I don't go to jail. So it's really not about the theology of if I approve of it or not, but just the legal standing of did it really happen? Because I've certainly come across folks who have said they are divorced, but turned out legally it never happened. So that can happen. That's why I have to see the paper.
Is there a thing called common law divorce? No?
I was gonna say.
There's common law marriage. But not
Right.
common law.
I never heard of it. But I imagine if nothing else, like the IRS is gonna want to make sure it legally happened, right?
How do Kenny, you were talking about conservative Anglicans and Episcopalians who don't recognize divorce. How do they think about Jesus' comments that you shouldn't divorce compared, God supposedly when Moses comes down from the mountain, there are divorce laws about divorce is fine, there's just certain steps you have to take. How do they think about those two things? That confuses.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. Yes.
I was really curious what you thought about it.
I haven't meditated on it, I haven't thought about it.
The short version of it is messy, and you can find examples in Scripture that both point to divorce and no divorce. It's anybody who wants to tell you it's as simple as the Bible says this has not read all of it. They've picked out the part that supports their argument. Because you can find evidence for any number of positions. Even within Jesus, who Jesus himself seems conflicting depending on which translation you're reading or which version of the story you're reading, where he definitely seems against the idea of divorce being used as an excuse to justify infidelity. Like, as I read it, it seems like Jesus seems to be of the sense of just because you are interested in being in a partnership with that other person and are going to be unfaithful, you shouldn't just get a divorce as an excuse to do that. He seems to be against that idea. But he also seems very much to be against the idea of somebody being in a harmful relationship. He seems like he understands the idea of a person ending up in a relationship that is harmful to them and separating from that relationship without being condemning of the person. So even Jesus seems conflicting on this. When in doubt, I tend to go to the theology of what do I personally believe a loving God would want for us, and I don't believe a loving God would want us to be in a relationship that's hurtful or filled with domestic violence. I also don't believe a loving God would want us to just callously throw away the vows because we're just not feeling good in the moment, because they're inconvenient. Yeah, so somewhere in between.
It's in the language that marriage is meant to be mutually beneficial, and when that's no longer the case, divorce is necessary, I think. But that's also why we have the language in there about in sickness and health, for richer and poorer, like not just in the good times. Like things get hard, you don't necessarily just walk away because things get hard.
I threw this in because this is the blessing over, after they have the blessing over the rings and when they're exchanging the rings. This is very much shifted from the, I'm putting this ring on you to show that you're mine, all other people hands off, right? Like, we've shifted now to a mutual exchanging of rings, and we say, this is what this is an outward and visible sign of. It's a sacramental outward and visible sign of my vows, and that with all that I am and all that I have, I honor you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the theology of the ring has shifted quite a bit.
It's not branding iron.
Let's see, was that kind of the, oh, well. And then this is the actual, yes, this is what I did yesterday. So that now that this person and this person have given themselves to each other by solemn vows, and the joining of hands, and the giving and receiving of rings, is that receptions theology again happening in there. That it's not just the giving of the rings, but it's also the receiving of the rings. Let's just now thinking about the mutualism there. I pronounce that they are wed to one another in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those whom God has joined together, let no one put asunder. That's when I wrap their hands. Anyone who was there yesterday, I wrap their hands in the stole and I bind them together.
That's where the expression tie the knot comes from.
Yeah, that's, yep. Any other thoughts? I'll say, we talked about going about and like how do the words that we say inform the way we live our lives? Be honest here, right? Like, there's hard moments, right? There's hard moments. Sometimes it's for richer, sometimes it's for poorer, sometimes it's in sickness, sometimes it's in health. I think about these vows all the time. I don't think these vows are the thing that makes us married, right? But they're definitely something that informs me as I am trying to navigate our relationship.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. Turns out.
There other thoughts about these vows? I think we did it again, everybody. I don't think we have time to get into all the ordination vows, but when we do ordination vows, we'll get into somewhat. But interesting point we did make earlier, though, which was the although obey went away in the marriage vows, obey did not go away in the ordination vows. I still have to obey my bishop, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others until my death, until we are parted by death, or I move to another diocese.
Right. Then you have to obey a different.
I have to obey a different bishop. There will always be some bishop I have to obey. I just get transferred like property from one bishop to another bishop.
Are you gonna go when you get to ordination? Are you gonna go like what's a canon vicar versus what's a canon versus what's a very reverend?
All
the
the
titles.
styles and titles and the
Yeah.
difference between vocations and occupations and all of that. We could do that. That would be fun.
All that's new to us because we came from, well, I grew up Southern Baptist and then Methodist, so it's different titles everywhere.
Canonically, we recognize rector and not rector. Everything else is custom, it's not canon law. So a rector has tenure. There's a mutual agreement between the rector and their parish. So the parish can't just say, we don't want you to be our rector anymore, get out. The rector has to, it has to be mutual, it's two-sided.
And the rector also can't just leave either. They have to have the permission to leave too. Yeah.
Right. That's why sometimes you see someone who is in charge of a parish, but they're called priest in charge. They don't have that same mutual agreement. They don't have that tenure. A rector can only be removed non-consensually by the bishop, and that's only in cases of some kind of misconduct. They can't just say, like, we're tired of you, we want to move on, you know.
So y'all are not appointed then by the bishop or?
We have to have the consent. So when the search committee, say, hires Lisa Hackney James, she's our dean. She's the rector of St. James as a parish, but she's the dean because it's a cathedral. She was elected by the people of St. James and hired for the job with the consent of the bishop. And so if, for say, when I was hired as the rector at St. Stephen's at my last parish, it had to be approved of by the bishop, but the bishop didn't appoint me or pick me. The parish picked me and
The
appointed me.
Methodist appoint.
Right.
Different than the
Yeah.
Methodists,
Yeah.
yes. Very different than
Our-
Methodists
yeah.
or Catholics.
Our search process looks a lot more like the secular, you know, we look at what jobs are available and we apply and we see if it's a good fit, you know, through the interview process, and then we decide, yes, we'd like to call this person, or, you know.
Is vicar a British term, or is it synonymous with rector or?
Right, no, actually, so terminology-wise, it shares the root word from like vicarious, right? Like, because the idea is the chief pastor of every church in the entire diocese is the bishop. Really, the bishop is really the chief pastor.
The diocese is the smallest unit of our church, canonically.
But because the bishop cannot be in all 100+ parishes simultaneously on a Sunday morning, or throughout the week, the bishop needs to have someone vicariously there on their behalf when they're not there, hence vicar, right? The idea is this person is here acting as the local presence of the bishop in the absence of the bishop. But so if I'm at St. Stephen's and the bishop comes walking in, I actually no longer have a function or a job there while the bishop is present. I only have a function while the bishop is away. It's a little bit different in the cathedral, but we can dig into all this.
Isn't a vicar the head of a mission church?
And that's how we largely use it here, is if a church has not become a parish yet, but is still a mission, which means it's being usually still supported by the bishop and the diocese, that we'll call that person the vicar, vicariously on behalf of the bishop.
That's where you also see the priest in charge title. I mean, they're functionally the same, but canonically there's a distinction. The title of canon, which you asked specifically about, implies like a diocesan level position or a cathedral position, or sometimes it's given to like particularly distinguished clergy who've been serving a long time. But in the canons of the church, there's nothing official about the title. We call so anybody who's ordained is the reverend whoever. The very reverend is a title given to deans, cathedral deans, seminary deans, and then bishops are styled the right reverend. And then the presiding bishop, who's not hierarchically over all the other bishops, but sort of a first among equals. When the bishops all meet together, the presiding bishop is who presides over that meeting. They're styled the most reverend.
So you can be reverend, or you can be very reverend,
Yeah.
or you can be right reverend, or you can be most